He threw a newborn into the lake, claiming it was a code violation under his fake homeowner association rules. Bryce Mills, a disgraced ex-guard, turned a peaceful neighborhood into his own twisted domain of fear, but he never expected the baby's father to be Jason Callow, a former Navy SEAL with nothing left to lose. And just wait until you see the shocking twist that followed and how justice came crashing down in the end. The sun was just beginning to rise over Lakewood County, casting a soft amber glow across the rooftops and dew-soaked lawns. The air was still, the kind of quiet you only get right before the world wakes up. Birds stirred in the trees, the occasional hum of sprinklers filled the silence. In his backyard, Jason Callow stood by the grill, flipping pancakes with one hand and holding a baby monitor in the other. After 12 years serving in the Navy SEALs, he had traded war zones for waffles and early morning breakfasts, and he liked it that way. His wife Emily was inside with their newborn son Logan, who had finally fallen asleep after a rough night. Jason was still getting used to the rhythm of civilian life, mowing lawns instead of sweeping buildings, grilling instead of guarding. He had bought their new home in what the real estate agent had called a model homeowner association community, where everything was supposedly safe, organized, and tightly regulated. It was that last part he had not paid enough attention to. The first time he had met Bryce Mills, the so-called homeowner association officer, Jason had brushed him off as one of those guys who never outgrew Halloween costumes. The man wore a patched-up security uniform with fake credentials, carried a clipboard like it was a badge, and strutted through the neighborhood like he was the sheriff of a one-house town. He handed out warnings about mailbox colors and sidewalk chalk like they were federal citations. Jason had seen men like him before, not in uniform but in attitude, delusions of authority, control freaks who cracked when the world did not bow to them. Still, he never thought Bryce would become a real threat. That morning, Jason was flipping the last pancake when Logan's soft gurgle crackled through the monitor. He smiled, wiped his hands, and stepped inside to grab a bottle from the warmer. It could not have been more than 30 seconds, just long enough for a predator to move. Then tires screeched, a roar tore through the peaceful air, followed by a metallic crunch. Jason's instincts snapped to life. He dropped the bottle, bolted to the porch and froze at the edge of the driveway. Bryce Mills stood next to a dusty white pickup with a magnetic homeowner association enforcement sign slapped on the door. His eyes were wide, unblinking, his whole frame twitching with manic energy, and in his arms, the stroller with Logan inside. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. Code violation, Bryce bellowed, lifting the stroller like a piece of stolen luggage. What are you? Jason started to scream, but Bryce was already running, not toward the street, not toward a car, toward the lake. Jason gave chase, his bare feet pounding against concrete and wet grass, adrenaline flooding every nerve in his body. He screamed Bryce's name over and over, the words catching in his throat like glass. Stop, put him down. They reached the lake in under 15 seconds. Jason was maybe 3 steps behind when Bryce stopped at the edge. Homeowner association regulations, Bryce roared, voice cracking, pupils wild, no unapproved objects left in public view, and with both hands he heaved the stroller into the water. There was a splash, a silence, then he vanished into the trees, into the fog. Jason did not even pause, he dove. The world stopped, time collapsed into a single frozen breath as the stroller sank into the lake's still surface. The water rippled once, then swallowed it whole. No sound, no movement, just a deafening stillness that shattered every law of nature. Jason did not think, he did not scream, he did not even breathe, he moved. It was instinct, not decision, a body trained for combat now responding to something far more primal. He hit the water like a missile, slicing through the icy surface in one clean dive. The cold was sharp, but he did not feel it. What burned in his veins was not temperature, it was terror. His muscles knew what to do, his mind did not. All he could see was the shadow of that stroller disappearing into the deep. His eyes stung, his lungs burned, every second was a hammer on his chest. 1, he kicked downward, cutting through the murk. 2, the world above vanished, only black water and the muffled thunder of his own heart remained. 3, a glimmer, the metal bar of the stroller half buried in silt. 4, he grabbed it, yanked, it was stuck. 5, he repositioned, dug his boots into the lake bed and heaved. 6. It came loose, he surged upward, cradling the tiny form with both arms. 7. He broke the surface with a gasp, sucking in air, and dragging Logan's limp body to his chest. The baby was still too still. Jason stumbled toward the shore, half swimming, half running through the shallows, water slushing around him, dripping from his hair, eyes, mouth. He laid Logan gently on the grass. The child did not move. Then a cough, a shudder, a sound, a sharp gasping wail tore through the silence, high and raw. Jason dropped to his knees, pulled Logan into his arms, wrapped him in a soaked shirt, and pressed him close. The cry turned into a breathless whimper, then into sobs, the most beautiful sound Jason had ever heard. He held his son tighter than he had ever held anything in his life. Alive, he was alive. Jason did not speak for a long time. He just stared at the trembling little chest rising and falling against his own. Every instinct told him to cry, to collapse, to thank the sky for what he just pulled back from the edge, but he did not cry, he did not collapse, because something inside him had changed, something old had returned. He stood up slowly, cradling Logan with one arm. With the other, he pulled off his jacket, the heavy Navy issue field coat he had not worn since leaving service, and wrapped it around the baby. His hands no longer shook, his breath no longer came in gasps, his gaze turned hard, steady, focused. That this was not over. Jason looked across the lake, scanning the trees, the roads, the shadows. Somewhere out there Bryce was still walking free. "I am going to find him," Jason whispered, voice low and steady. There was no rage in his tone, no screaming, just certainty. He pressed a kiss to Logan's forehead, and in that moment the man who had left combat behind ceased to exist. What remained was something colder, sharper, silent fury wrapped in discipline, and it was not going away. Bryce Mills was no ordinary troublemaker. He was not a prankster playing dress-up, or a harmless eccentric patrolling the streets for fun. He was something darker, something fueled by rejection, bitterness, and a twisted obsession with control. Years ago, he had been a night shift warehouse guard, fired after a string of complaints involving intimidation and physical aggression. No formal charges had stuck, but everyone who worked with him remembered the look in his eyes when he was told he no longer had authority. It was not disappointment, it was rage. After that, he disappeared from most people's radar, moved into a small camper trailer tucked behind the woods at the far end of the neighborhood, land technically outside city zoning. From there, he built his fantasy. He called it Homeowner Association Tactical Unit. Most laughed it off at first. He printed fake citations and slipped them into mailboxes. He created violation tags for things like excessive grass density and unauthorized garden gnomes. But then he started showing up on doorsteps in uniform, dark navy jacket, boots, knockoff badge on his chest, and knocking hard. He carried a clipboard, radio, flashlight, everything to look official. What followed were fake inspections, nighttime rounds with a flashlight beaming through windows, and loud declarations about property code compliance. He even claimed he had escalation powers if residents did not cooperate. Most neighbors found it unsettling, but they let it slide. No one wanted confrontation. Some thought he might be mentally unwell, others feared retaliation. Few even obeyed his warnings, cutting bushes, repainting fences, just to avoid the knock at their door. But when Logan ended up in the lake, everything changed. Silence turned into whispers, whispers into stories, stories into statements. People began coming forward, quietly, carefully, not to the police, not yet, but to someone they knew could act, Jason Callow. A neighbor named Helen, who lived near the woods, recalled seeing Bryce standing waist-deep in the lake in full uniform weeks earlier, as if performing some twisted drill. Another man, Aaron, mentioned he had seen Bryce dragging crates to a hidden shack behind the ridge. A teenage boy admitted he had once been followed home by Bryce late at night, with the man scribbling something on a notepad every time the kid looked over his shoulder. One woman even produced a photo snapped from a distance of Bryce inside a backyard, measuring grass with a ruler, a holstered object visible on his hip. No one had acted before, but now they wanted to be heard, and Jason listened. He did not take notes, he did not ask for dates or times. He just listened, expression cold, and eyes locked as the picture came together. Each piece fit into a growing outline of a man who had stopped pretending long ago. Bryce believed he was law, and the world was supposed to obey. Jason was not collecting evidence, he was not building a case. This was not for the courtroom, it was for something else, something quieter, quicker, justice measured by the only code Jason had ever truly trusted, the kind you do not write down, the kind you carry. Jason found the trailer 2 days later. It was buried deep beyond the ridge where the trees grew thick and the land dipped into a forgotten patch of woods just past the edge of the neighborhood. Overgrown weeds clawed at the tires, rust spread like a disease across the faded shell. To most it looked abandoned, just another relic left behind by time, but Jason saw the faint trail in the dirt, the fresh boot prints, the faint hum of a battery-powered generator ticking from somewhere inside. He did not knock. He opened the door and stepped in, slow, every movement deliberate. What greeted him was not a home, it was a shrine. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, neighborhood newsletters, printed emails, faces of residents pinned under red string like a crime drama gone rogue. There were maps of the area, each one marked in detail, property lines, fence heights, security camera angles. Sticky notes filled every corner. Some scribbled with names, others with words like non-compliant, visual threat, repeat offender. And in the center of it all, on a makeshift plywood table lit by a desk lamp, sat a single file folder labeled in thick red block letters, Callow. Jason stared at it for several seconds before reaching out. Inside, the first page hit like a punch to the chest, a photo of Logan, no more than a week old, taken from a distance, grainy, tilted, but unmistakable. Underneath, written in jagged red marker, was one word, mutant. Jason's hands tightened around the paper. Beneath the photo were printouts, his own social media posts, service records pulled from open sources, diagrams of his backyard, the layout of his home, even the serial number from the mailbox he had installed just last month. Everything about his life, down to the brand of car he drove, was in this file, and that meant only one thing. This was not about some random code violation, this was targeted. Bryce had not snapped suddenly, he had planned this, studied, waited, and when he struck, it was not out of impulse, it was personal. Jason kept flipping, more notes, a scribbled line reading seal threat profile high. Another note underlined twice, weak point equals sign child. The rage simmering inside him no longer burned, it crystallized cold, sharp. This man had not just crossed a line, he had built an entire world on the other side of it. And the most chilling part, Bryce had left it all here, untouched, almost like he wanted it found, as if he was waiting. Jason took one last look around the trailer, his gaze landed on a cracked photo frame nailed to the wall. It held a black and white image of a much younger Bryce standing in what looked like a security guard uniform. The glass was broken, beneath it scrawled in pen was a phrase, "Order is earned, not given." Jason turned, stepped outside, and closed the door behind him. He knew what this was now, this was not some act of madness, it was a challenge, and Jason had already accepted. The house was quiet, Emily and Logan were asleep in the back room, safe and warm under the soft hum of the baby monitor. Jason moved through the hallway like a shadow, not making a sound. He did not flick on the lights, he did not check his phone, everything he needed was already in his mind, mapped, measured, resolved. He stepped into the study and closed the door behind him. Then, with one hand, he reached beneath the bottom shelf of the cabinet, pressing his thumb into the hidden magnetic panel. A soft click echoed in the dark, the floorboard lifted. Inside, a steel lockbox bolted to the foundation. Jason entered the code with muscle memory alone, the lid opened. There it was, Glock 19, matte black, standard issue, clean, balanced, and absolutely reliable. It had been with him through 3 deployments, coastlines, rooftops, drop zones, and now it waited once more, ready not for war, but for resolution. He lifted it carefully, ran a cloth across the slide, and chambered around. The sound was soft, precise, a sound that did not echo but stayed with you. 17 rounds, he checked them one by one, counting not with numbers but with breath. Every click of a magazine's spring reminded him who he was beneath the quiet smiles. and grilled breakfasts beneath the baby carrier and friendly nods to neighbors beneath the new lawn, the painted porch, the American flag fluttering gently outside. He was trained for moments like this, not in rage, not in panic, but in clarity. Jason holstered the Glock and walked to the closet. From the back, he pulled the gear he had not touched in years, boots that did not squeak, a field jacket with pockets that remembered how to stay silent, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked in the mirror just once. The reflection was not the suburban father. It was the man who knew how to read the ground, predict movement, control breath, and end chaos before it spread. He did not move like a man seeking revenge. He moved like a man fulfilling a task, a mission with no margin for hesitation. Jason stepped outside and let the door shut behind him. The night air was still, trees whispered in the distance, the streets were empty, but he did not need a map to find his target. He knew Bryce would not run far, not tonight, not after leaving a trail like that, a message wrapped in obsession. People like Bryce do not hide, they wait, they return to the place where they felt power. Jason glanced toward the horizon, where the silhouette of the lake shimmered under the silver glow of the moon. That is where Bryce would be, where it all started. Jason did not flinch, he did not speak, he walked, and with every step he shed the weight of pretending until all that remained was purpose and steel. The fog lay thick over the lake, hugging the ground like it was afraid to let go. Every tree along the shoreline stood frozen, branches stiff in the windless air. The silence was dense, broken only by the slow lapping of water against the rocks. It did not feel like night, it felt like the hour before something irreversible. Jason emerged from the woods without a word, his boots moved through the wet grass without sound, his breath steady, heart quiet. There was no emotion left on his face, just focus, purpose. He could see the shape ahead, just where he thought it would be, Bryce Mills, standing near the water's edge, motionless in the fog. One arm hung loose by his side, the other rested across his chest, cradling something metallic and short-barreled, a shotgun. Jason did not flinch, he simply stepped forward. Bryce turned his head slowly, the way someone might when hearing footsteps in a dream. "I knew you would come," he muttered, not raising the weapon yet. His voice was hoarse like he had not spoken aloud in hours. "Took you longer than I expected." Jason stopped about 30 feet away, no words, no movement. Bryce smiled faintly, something in his face cracked and glassy. "You think you are the judge here. I did what your precious homeowner association was too weak to do. I brought order." Still Jason did not speak. Bryce's hand twitched, he raised the shotgun, fired. The blast shattered the fog, tearing through air and underbrush. It missed. Jason was already to the left, moving on reflex, feet hitting the dirt with the balance of a man who had run operations in deserts, jungles, mountains. His pistol came up, not rushed, not panicked, like a craftsman lifting his tool. The first round hit Bryce in the shoulder, the second struck his thigh, the third, precise and intentional, hit low, stopping Bryce's crawl before it started. The man dropped hard, his body folded sideways onto the mud with a cry that turned into a broken wheeze. The shotgun slid from his grip, spinning once before landing near the reeds. Jason walked toward him, his steps deliberate and silent, no rush, no fear, just the sound of boots pressing wet earth and the distant echo of water kissing the shore. Bryce was breathing heavy now, propped on one elbow, eyes wild. "You are not law," he spat. "You are not allowed." Jason said nothing. He grabbed Bryce by the collar and pulled. The man's body dragged easily through the dirt, his limbs jerking like broken branches. The fog closed in behind them as Jason hauled him toward the water, toward the same stretch of shoreline where the stroller had disappeared days before. The lake was calm. Jason stopped at the edge and stared out at the still water, then he looked down. Bryce's voice trembled now. Do not do this, please." Jason crouched slowly, leaning in just enough so Bryce could hear every word. "You threw my son in this lake," he said softly, without blinking, without thinking, just gone. Bryce's breathing hitched. Jason did not raise his voice, he did not shake with fury, he was past that. "This is not payback," he said almost quietly, "this is clarity." Bryce writhed weakly, grabbing at Jason's sleeve with one hand. Jason did not move. You wanted him to drown, he said. You called it code enforcement. You saw a child and thought target. He paused. Now you are going to feel what he felt. And with one hand he pulled Bryce a foot closer to the water's edge. The lake lapped at his legs. Bryce let out a whimper, but Jason just stood, not to harm, to show, to remind. He stared down at the man who thought himself untouchable and watched fear take the place of arrogance. The same fear Logan must have felt, surrounded by cold, alone in silence. Jason did not throw him in. He did not have to. Bryce had already sunk in every way that mattered. Jason stood at the edge of the lake, the mist curling around his legs, the barrel of his pistol still warm. The man at his feet, Bryce Mills, shivered not from the cold but from the realization that his world had finally come undone. Jason stared down at him in silence for a long moment. There was nothing but the sound of water lapping against the rocks, the slow, uneven breaths of a man who had finally met something stronger than his delusion. Bryce was no longer the self-declared enforcer of neighborhood order, no more clipboard, no more fake badge, just a man lying in mud, wounded and afraid, waiting for a verdict he did not get to write. But Jason did not push him into the water. He did not drag him beneath the surface. He did not cross that line. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed 911. Said the dispatcher on the other end, "What is your emergency?" Jason's voice was steady. "I have neutralized an armed suspect. He is injured but alive. I need units at Lakeshore Trail. Send EMS and law enforcement." He did not elaborate, he did not explain, he gave coordinates, then he ended the call. Minutes passed. Jason did not move from his spot. He stood there, Glock still in hand, not aimed, just held like a tool that had done its job and was waiting to be put away. He watched Bryce crawl slightly as if trying to inch away, but every breath was a struggle. The injuries had slowed him, humbled him, forced him to feel what others had: helplessness, uncertainty, vulnerability. Jason did not offer comfort, he offered truth. "You knew I would come," Jason said quietly. "You planned for it." Bryce coughed, lips trembling. You were supposed to stop people like you, protect the weak." "I did," Jason replied. The faint sound of sirens grew in the distance, weaving through the trees like the final chapter of a book already written. Red and blue lights finally bled into the fog, dancing across the lake like ghosts. Tires crunched on gravel, doors slammed. Hands in the air, came the call from a deputy, voice sharp, boots hitting the shore. Jason turned toward them calmly. He set the Glock gently on the ground, raised both hands, and stepped back from Bryce. "I'm not resisting," he said. "The weapon is on the ground, suspect is down, armed earlier, he is alive for now." The officers moved in quickly. Two covered Jason, another moved toward Bryce, a fourth collected the pistol. The moment passed without shouting, without panic. It was clean, precise, just like everything Jason had done. Bryce whimpered as the deputy rolled him onto his side and clipped restraints around his wrists. "You cannot let him get away with this," Bryce cried, voice cracking. "He is a soldier, he is supposed to protect people, that is what they do." Jason stood motionless. The officer holding him turned slightly, unsure what to make of the accusation, but Jason looked straight into Bryce's eyes, calm, steady, unshaken. "I protected," he said firmly, "just not you." The words hung in the air, heavier than the fog, clearer than the sirens. It was over. Jason was not applauded, no crowd gathered, no grand statement was made. He simply watched as Bryce was lifted onto a stretcher, his words growing softer, more desperate, until they were lost in the hum of the engines. Then Jason turned and looked out at the lake once more. The water was still again, and for the first time since that terrible morning, he let himself breathe. The gavel struck once, then silence. Bryce Mills was sentenced then to 45 years in federal prison, no parole, no suspended terms, no second chances. The courtroom did not erupt into applause. There were no cheers, just quiet exhalations like an entire town releasing a breath it had not realized it was holding. The man who had stalked their streets, who had weaponized fear under the guise of order, was finally gone. The charges were numerous: attempted murder of an infant, kidnapping, impersonating law enforcement, criminal harassment, unlawful surveillance, breaking and entering, and abuse of authority. But more than the legal jargon, what mattered most was this: he had been stopped, and he would never hurt another neighbor again. Jason sat still through the entire sentencing, expression unreadable. His wife Emily held Logan close on the bench beside him. The baby had fallen asleep in her arms, unaware that this quiet moment in a courthouse was the final chapter of something that had nearly taken him away forever. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, cameras flashed, microphones reached forward. Jason walked past them without a word. The story did not belong to them, it belonged to the people of Lakewood, and they were just beginning to reclaim it. What came next was something rare, change inspired by the events surrounding the case. Nearly every resident in the homeowner association zone attended the emergency community meeting held 2 weeks later, not to protest, not to fight, but to take back what had been twisted. They came armed with evidence, photos, complaints, first-hand accounts, everything they had once been too afraid to say, they brought into the open. Bryce's trail of manipulation went back years: fake citations, unauthorized property checks, nighttime intrusions under the guise of security checks. It became clear the homeowner association board had either turned a blind eye or had never truly checked his credentials. Either way, trust had been broken. A class action lawsuit followed. Residents demanded accountability not only for Bryce but for the system that enabled him. Investigators combed through board records, financials, hiring documents. What they found led to a full legal audit, and within months, the homeowner association board was dissolved. A new one was formed, publicly elected, transparently managed. The new board included veterans, educators, and parents who vowed to restore the balance between order and freedom, between safety and fear. Jason was offered a position. He declined. He did not need power, he had peace, and that peace took shape every morning in the same place it had nearly been shattered, the lake, just after dawn. Jason followed a quiet path that wound behind the houses, through a stretch of trees, and opened to the shoreline. He carried Logan in his arms, sometimes sleeping, sometimes blinking at the rising sun. The boy had grown healthier with each passing week, his laugh had returned, his breath no longer shook. They stopped at the water's edge, where the fog now seemed softer, the lake more peaceful. Jason knelt on one knee and pointed toward the line in the distance. "That is where you almost did not get to see the world," he said softly, "but you did, because you are braver than what tried to stop you." Logan made a baby noise, reached up and wrapped his fingers around his father's thumb. Jason smiled. "You are braver than death, son, and I am braver than fear." That had become his quiet habit, not for revenge, not for memory, for thankfulness. Not a day passed that he did not think of how close he had come to losing everything. But now, instead of carrying a gun, he carried his son. Instead of watching his back, he watched the sunrise. He had not forgotten who he was, he had simply chosen a different goal, and in that choice, he found more power than any warfield ever gave him. The lake remained still, but Jason's strong will, like the morning light, kept rising.